They say superpowers never fall, that no one dares to challenge the might of the United States. But what if I told you that not once, not twice, but 4 times in recent history, one nation without the wealth, without the military dominance, and without fear stood up and shook America to its core? Not with tanks or bombs, but with bold strategy, precise timing, and a kind of silent courage the world didn't see coming. This isn't a theory or a story twisted by bias. It's truth. A truth buried under headlines, forgotten in the noise, and erased from mainstream history. But today, that truth returns. In this video, you'll witness the 4 moments that left Washington stunned, disrupted global order, and changed the rules of power forever. Stay with us till the end, because by the time it's over, you won't just know what happened. You'll understand why it matters now more than ever. The 1979 Iran hostage crisis was one of the most shocking and defining moments in modern U.S.-Iran relations. A move that caught the entire world, and especially the United States, off guard. Following the Iranian Revolution, which overthrew the Western-backed Shah of Iran, anti-American sentiment surged across the country. On November 4, 1979, a group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. This bold act was not just a protest, it was a direct challenge to American dominance, one that sent shockwaves through Washington and across the globe. For 444 days, the hostages were held under intense conditions, their fate unknown to the American public. This prolonged crisis tested the resolve of the U.S. government, embarrassed its leadership on the global stage, and paralyzed diplomatic channels. President Jimmy Carter, despite numerous efforts, was unable to negotiate their release, which severely damaged his political reputation and was one of the reasons he lost re-election in 1980. The hostages were not released until the very moment Ronald Reagan was sworn in as president, a final symbolic blow that underscored the psychological and political impact Iran had delivered. What made this event so shocking was the level of control and confidence displayed by Iran. At a time when most nations feared direct confrontation with the United States, Iran, fresh from revolution and facing internal chaos, chose to defy Washington in the most public and humiliating way possible. There were no drones, no armies, no sanctions, just a group of determined students backed by a new revolutionary regime who knew exactly what message they were sending. Iran would no longer play by America's rules. This crisis also shifted global media narratives. For over a year, the American public watched every day as the hostages remained in captivity, with a countdown plastered across TV screens and newspapers. Iran had captured not only people, but attention, and used it as a weapon. The psychological warfare was as effective as any military strike. The hostage crisis permanently altered diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Iran. It marked the beginning of a new era of tension, distrust, and strategic hostility. More importantly, it proved that a nation, no matter how recently destabilized, could shake a superpower if it had the will, the courage, and the timing. It wasn't just a rebellion, it was a statement to the world. The second keynote centers around Operation Eagle Claw, a failed U.S. military mission in 1980 that aimed to rescue the 52 American hostages held in Tehran. This mission, approved by President Jimmy Carter, was one of the most daring and complex special operations ever attempted by the United States at the time. It involved sending an elite team of commandos into Iran under the cover of darkness, landing in the desert, and then launching a surprise attack on the embassy in Tehran to extract the hostages. On paper, the operation was bold and precise. In reality, it turned into one of the most humiliating moments in U.S. military history. The plan required multiple aircraft, including helicopters and cargo planes, to meet at a remote desert location in Iran, codenamed Desert One. From there, the team would proceed to the capital. But from the very beginning, the mission faced severe setbacks. Mechanical failures began early, with several helicopters breaking down due to sandstorms and technical malfunction. By the time the aircraft arrived at Desert One, the minimum number of operational helicopters needed for the mission had not been met. Despite intense planning and preparation, nature, distance, and bad luck conspired to make the mission impossible. The situation deteriorated rapidly when one of the helicopters collided with a transport aircraft while refueling, causing a fiery explosion that killed 8 American servicemen. With the operation compromised and lives lost, the mission was aborted. What was meant to be a heroic rescue turned into a public disaster. The images of burned-out wreckage in the Iranian desert were broadcast around the world, turning what was supposed to be a covert mission into a global embarrassment for the United States. The failure of Operation Eagle Claw had far-reaching consequences. It not only prolonged the hostage crisis, but also exposed flaws in U.S. special operations capabilities. It led to a complete restructuring of American elite forces and directly contributed to the formation of the U.S. Special Operations Command. For Iran, however, it was a moment of triumph. A superpower had entered its land in secret and failed miserably. The botched mission boosted Iranian morale, legitimized a new revolutionary regime, and sent a strong message that even the most powerful military in the world could be humbled. Operation Eagle Claw was more than a failed mission. It was a psychological blow, a strategic miscalculation, and a rare moment where American power was visibly shaken on foreign soil. The third keynote highlights Iran's unprecedented military response to the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020, when Iran launched ballistic missiles at 2 U.S. military bases in Iraq. This event marked the first time in modern history that a state directly targeted American forces in retaliation rather than through proxies or diplomatic means. Soleimani, a top Iranian general and one of the most powerful figures in the region, was killed by a U.S. drone strike ordered by then-President Donald Trump. His death was a significant escalation in U.S.-Iran tensions, and many feared it would trigger a full-scale war. Instead of resorting to indirect methods, Iran chose to respond in a way that shocked both the American government and global observers. Within days of Soleimani's killing, Iran fired over a dozen precision-guided missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq, including Al-Assad Air Base, where hundreds of American soldiers were stationed. The missile struck with devastating accuracy, destroying infrastructure and equipment. Though the U.S. initially claimed there were no casualties, it was later revealed that over 100 American personnel suffered traumatic brain injuries, a fact that only added to the weight of Iran's response. The attack was calculated, disciplined, and intentionally measured to avoid immediate escalation. It was still a bold demonstration of Iran's military capabilities and willingness to confront the U.S. directly. What made this act especially significant was that Iran took full credit for the strike, announcing it publicly and calling it Operation Martyr Soleimani. It wasn't a shadow war or covert operation. It was a nation standing up and retaliating against a global superpower. This shattered the long-standing belief that Iran would never dare strike U.S. forces openly for fear of massive retaliation. Instead, it showcased a new doctrine, one where Iran could hurt the U.S. without sparking a war. using precision and psychological strategy instead of brute force. The missile strike had deeper implications beyond the physical damage. It shook the perception of U.S. invincibility in the Middle East and sent a message to other regional players that Iran was not only capable, but willing to respond on its own terms. It also forced the U.S. to reconsider its military positioning and the potential costs of further escalation. Iran's bold and public strike changed the dynamics of deterrence in the region and served as a reminder that even in a world dominated by superpowers, no action comes without consequence. The fourth keynote focuses on Iran's increasing use of advanced technology to counter U.S. intelligence and surveillance, most notably when it shot down a U.S. RQ-4 Global Hawk surveillance drone in 2019. This drone, one of the most sophisticated and expensive in the American arsenal, was flying over the Strait of Hormuz when it was brought down by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps using a surface-to-air missile. The U.S. claimed the drone was flying in international airspace, while Iran asserted it had violated Iranian airspace. Regardless of the disputed geography, the incident was a strategic and symbolic shock. The act of intercepting and destroying a high-tech U.S. drone sent a powerful message. Iran had both the capability and the confidence to challenge American technological superiority head-on. This wasn't the first time Iran had successfully disrupted U.S. aerial operations. Years earlier, in 2011, Iran captured a U.S. RQ-170 Sentinel stealth drone by reportedly hacking into its navigation system and forcing it to land intact. These incidents, taken together, highlight Iran's growing emphasis on electronic warfare and cyber defense, an area often underestimated by its adversaries. Over time, Iran has invested heavily in developing indigenous radar systems, cyber units, and electronic jamming tools, allowing it to neutralize some of the most advanced military technologies in the world. The shooting down of the Global Hawk was a bold demonstration of this evolving strategy, directly undermining the image of U.S. invulnerability in the skies. In addition to drone interception, Iran has launched cyber attacks on American infrastructure, targeting banks, energy systems, and even government networks. These attacks are not always widely publicized, but they represent a quiet battlefield where Iran has proven to be agile, persistent, and innovative. It no longer relies solely on traditional weapons or proxy forces. It now engages in digital warfare, using code and signals as tools of resistance and retaliation. This shift has redefined the nature of modern conflict and forced the U.S. to adapt its own strategies. Iran's ability to successfully challenge the U.S. in cyber and technological arenas has shifted the balance of perception. It's not about matching the U.S. weapon for weapon, but about disrupting dominance in unexpected ways. By shooting down one drone, Iran did more than destroy a machine. It embarrassed a superpower, exposed its vulnerabilities, and reminded the world that war is no longer just fought with bombs and bullets, but with signals, codes, and calculated defiance. The fifth keynote focuses on Iran's bold seizure of oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic waterway that carries nearly a third of the world's oil supply. These actions were not only a response to U.S. sanctions and economic pressure, but a calculated show of power aimed at demonstrating Iran's ability to disrupt global markets and challenge Western dominance. In 2019, after the U.S. reimposed crippling sanctions on Iran and attempted to bring its oil exports to zero, tensions escalated rapidly. Iran responded by targeting international tankers, seizing British, UAE, and other flagged vessels suspected of violating maritime rules or allegedly aiding U.S. efforts. The message was clear. If Iran couldn't export its own oil, it would ensure others would have trouble doing so as well. These seizures caused immediate global concern, driving oil prices higher and sparking fears of a broader military conflict. The U.S. deployed naval forces to the Gulf, but Iran continued to operate aggressively in the region, using fast boats, helicopters, and elite Revolutionary Guard forces to conduct its operations. These tactics demonstrated a mastery of asymmetric warfare, disruptive, fast, and difficult to counter without escalating into full-blown war. By targeting oil tankers, Iran struck directly at the lifeline of global commerce. It reminded the world that despite economic isolation and sanctions, it retains significant leverage. Any threat to the Strait of Hormuz is a threat to the entire global energy supply, and Iran's actions forced major powers to pay attention. Insurance premiums on oil shipping skyrocketed, and companies rerouted vessels to avoid potential confrontation. Iran didn't need to fire missiles or occupy territory to make its point. It simply had to show that it could disrupt the system whenever it chose. These actions also had a psychological effect. Western nations, especially the U.S. and its allies, were reminded that Iran could not be ignored or easily subdued. The seizures embarrassed major navies and raised questions about the effectiveness of international deterrence. Iran portrayed its moves as defensive and lawful, positioning itself as a victim of economic aggression rather than an aggressor. In doing so, it framed its defiance not as provocation, but as resistance against unjust policies. Through these high-risk, high-impact operations, Iran demonstrated a new kind of power, one not dependent on traditional warfare, but on precision, timing, and the courage to challenge the system in the world's most sensitive and strategic waters. The sixth keynote centers on Iran's unexpected rise in regional influence through proxy warfare, a strategy that has quietly reshaped the balance of power in the Middle East without requiring direct confrontation with the United States. Rather than engaging in conventional battles, Iran built a vast and complex network of alliances with non-state actors and militias across several countries, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq, and elements within Syria. These groups, often trained, armed, and supported by Iran's Quds Force, serve as extensions of Iran's strategic reach, allowing it to apply pressure, resist U.S. influence, and shape political outcomes far beyond its borders. This method of indirect warfare stunned the U.S. because it proved both effective and resilient. Iran was able to embed itself deeply into local power structures, often stepping in where the U.S. had failed to bring stability. In Iraq, Iranian-backed militias became powerful players in politics and security, sometimes even integrated into the national defense structure. In Lebanon, Hezbollah transformed from a resistance group into a dominant political force. In Yemen, the Houthis turned into a serious military threat to Saudi Arabia, a close U.S. ally. Iran achieved all of this without deploying large armies or waging formal wars, using ideology, intelligence, and strategic funding to win influence where bombs could not. The shock to the U.S. came from the realization that despite decades of sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and military threats, Iran had managed to build a sphere of influence stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. While Washington invested billions in direct military interventions, Iran achieved results with far fewer resources and far less international attention. This asymmetric approach allowed Iran to bypass the superior military might of the U.S. and instead win long-term influence in key geopolitical arenas. This rise of influence also changed the way the U.S. had to operate in the region. Any confrontation with Iran now risked triggering conflict in multiple countries at once. Iran's ability to activate pressure points through proxies gave it a kind of strategic insurance, deterring direct attacks by raising the cost of retaliation. It wasn't about outmaneuvering it was about outmaneuvering it. Iran proved that in a modern geopolitical chessboard, soft power combined with calculated hard tactics could shock even the most dominant global force and rewrite the rules of conflict across an entire region. In the world of power and politics, dominance is never guaranteed, and Iran proved that time and again. Without matching America's weapons, it matched its will. Without waging full-scale war, it rewrote the rules of engagement. From seizing headlines to seizing oil tankers, from cyber strikes to psychological blows, Iran shocked the world not with size, but with strategy. Every move, every retaliation, every calculated silence reminded the world that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. These weren't just moments in history. They were messages, loud and clear, that even a giant can be shaken, and even the silent can roar. Thank you for watching this eye-opening journey through history and truth. If it made you think, share it. If it moved you, speak about it. Because awareness is power, and silence is never an option. Stay sharp, stay strong, and stay inspired. Good luck, and God bless.